One. There we go. Good morning. It is still morning. It's 11 a.m. and I call to order the February 13th, 2025 Board of Trustees workshop. Do I hear a motion to begin the workshop?
Madam Chair, I move we begin the workshop.
Thank you, Ms. Shealy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pizzuti. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. The district is in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act by notifying the media of the date, time, and place of the meeting. The district tapes the meeting for accuracy in preparing the minutes. I now yield the floor to Vice Chair Shealy.
Madam Chair, fellow board members, staff, and guests, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Chair, I now yield the floor back to you.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Moving on to item 3.1. Earlier this year, some administrative team and board members were at a meeting where Ms. Lordo presented a very thorough review of school finance. For the purpose of all board members having the opportunity to hear this, and in light of the upcoming budget season, Mrs. Lordo agreed to present to us today. Just a little background on Ms. Lordo. Mrs. Leanne Lordo is Associate Superintendent for Finance and Operations for the Fort Mill School District, where she has served in this role since 2008. She is a certified public accountant in South Carolina and North Carolina and has over 25 years of experience in governmental auditing and school district finance. She currently serves on the Legislative Committee for the South Carolina Association of School Business Officials and was the 2016 Business Official of the Year from the South Carolina Association of School Business Officials. Fort Mill School District has received the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting Awards from the Government Finance Officers Association and the Association of School Business Officials for the past 16 years. Hello. Welcome. I will turn it over to you.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm certainly glad to be here with you this morning. I said I don't usually go on the speaker circuit, but had a chance to speak at the School Boards Association and really appreciate that my information was useful and that you asked me to share to your full board this morning. I have always enjoyed our relationship between your school district and Fort Mill because we are so closely aligned in so many ways. I believe that for most of the time, we are the #1 and 2 fastest growing districts in the state, whether that's percentages or number of students. But we always love to collaborate with your district and exchange ideas because of that factor. It certainly comes with its own challenges for both of us. We are also the lowest free and reduced, the lowest poverty district in South Carolina. We're at 18%. I think you are 2 notches up from us. You're in the 30% range. I think Clover School District, which is also in York County District 2, they're at about 30%. So I think we're the bottom, then Clover, and then you all. So I say that because we have so many of the same challenges with funding because we receive so much less in federal funding than many of our counter districts in the state in so many different allocation methodologies for funding. So it has definitely been challenging. I'm sure you hear a lot of the same concerns from your community base as we do. There is this perception that in districts like ours that there is wealth and why do we need to worry about tax collections and we should have plenty of money, and that's just not the case. I think you're a little more commercial based than we are. We're still about 60% residential. Most of our growth is coming from families moving to our area who work in Charlotte, since we are right below the state line. So we have a lot of newcomers to the Fort Mill, TUK area that come to work in Charlotte that do not want to live in Charlotte and want to be in Fort Mill for the school district. So we've been very fortunate, but it has definitely come with its own challenges. So I'm excited to share some of our processes with you today. And I'd also like to share at the end, if we have time, I'd really like to share with you where we are with impact fees too. I know that you looked at that several years ago when Dr. Little was here. We had conversations, and I would just like to kind of give you an update on impact fees, make sure you understand that, because it's just another revenue stream that is afforded to us by South Carolina law. And it's a lengthy process, but I'll share with you, it's been well worth it for us. So I'm going to concentrate on budget and impact fees, and then any other procedural type things I'm glad to answer. Love to have conversation back and forth. I'm curious now, I believe several of you were just elected in November, so this is your first budget season. Just give me an idea. Okay. And then how many of you have been 3 years or less, or 4 years you were in the election before? Okay. So, join the fun. You're going to have a fun ride here for budget season. In the finance world, we work in 2 different parts of the year. From July 1st through December 1st, when we have to file our audit report with the state, we call that audit season. And for us finance folks, we are working in 2 different fiscal years. We're closing out the old year as we go through the fall, working with our auditors, pulling information, but we're also in the new school year. And then we hit December 1st, all of our financial reporting is completed at the state, and we come back after holiday break, and we are in budget season like we are now. So I'm probably the only person in the world who, and I told my school board this in October, I got really excited one weekend when I went to my mailbox and my property tax bill on my home was in my mailbox. I was so excited because I was the county sent those out on time. And I called the county auditor and I was like, thank you so much for sending out the property tax bills so that we can start getting property tax collections coming in. So, you just have to forgive us finance people. This is kind of how we think. But I hope a lot of the things that I share with you today, I'm sure they're going to be things that you are also hearing from your finance group. You have a great team here. I have been friends with them for a long time, and I hope a lot of what I say is just duplicating what they're saying to you as well. We have a great collaboration across the state. We have a wonderful association. We work together extremely well and share information, and it's quite a unique group, and it's been very, very beneficial. A couple things, I'll just start. That was my professional bio, but personally, I'm sorry for any of you Clemson people. I'm a Gamecock person. My family is. I went to school here. My husband did. My son and my daughter-in-law. So we are definitely Gamecock people. And in our free time, this is Foster. He's our grandson. Lives in Greenville. That's what we do for fun in our free time. So today I want to talk about, as I mentioned, the budget process. I think we all have similar goals. I know we do. We all have similar priorities, and I'm going to kind of share with you how we prioritize things in Fort Mill. And I certainly don't want to come across that what we do in Fort Mill is the way you have to do it, the best approach. My advice is just find an approach that works for you as a board, for you working with your administration, and then for your community, something that's understandable for your community. And we generally follow the same process because we have determined that that is what works best for us, and our principals understand it, and our community members understand it. And being accountable, I am very mindful that we are accountable to the taxpayers. We are a district that frequently goes out for bond referendums. Because of our growth, we've had to build many schools very quickly. We have, I think for a district our size, we have a pretty high debt limit. Our debt limit is very consistent with yours. We're at $500 million in outstanding debt. So we go to our taxpayers often, and we want to be very careful. We want to continue to have their trust. That is very important to us, and I think we do. But we are very, very careful about that and mindful of that because of frequent bond issues, bond referendums that we go out to the public. But our community has been overly supportive of public education in Fort Mill and doing what they need to do to continue, even in light of all the growth that we've had. Our latest referendum was actually a year ago in March of 2024. We had a referendum for slightly over $200 million, and it passed in the 60-something% favorable range. So our community has been very supportive of referendums and bonded debt. So let's talk about when you build your budget and really what's involved with that and some of the key things. It should convey your values and your priorities, and we talk a lot about that in our district. It's a tool. Things can change throughout the year. We hope it doesn't significantly change. We hope we don't have any significant state budget cuts and things like that. It's a protection. It definitely should be reviewed monthly. I'm sure that you receive a monthly financial report, as I give my board a monthly financial report. It's somewhat of a high-level report, but I also try to add some different comments if things are going on at the state level, things that I think that our board may be interested in or may have heard about. And it should align with your goals in your strategic plan. One of the things that, and I have another slide about calendar, but where we are right now in our budget is that we have set our calendar with a plan between now and June. Our board will approve our budget at their first meeting in June, which I think is June the 3rd or 4th, whatever the first Tuesday is. They will approve the budget that night. We also have public hearing of our budget on the same night. We went through several years where we had public hearing 2 weeks prior, like the second meeting in May. But a couple years ago, we decided that we wanted to make sure we had the most current state budget information. And as the state budget has, every year it seems like it's slower and slower and slower. And just now, especially with the new funding formula and the uncertainty of that, what we don't want to do is we want the public hearing presentation to as closely match what the board is going to approve as possible. We don't want any last-minute surprises going out to the community. So we started doing our public hearing on the same night as the final budget approval for that reason. We want the most current information when we go for public hearing. Does that make sense? I don't know what y'all do, but do y'all do yours the same night? Same night? I think that works great. Now, we have only had a couple years that I can even remember where we had people really come up and speak. Most of the time, it's just us presenting, and which is wonderful. That tells me the community agrees with it. They don't have any concerns. They support it, and it gives that a good feeling for our board members as well that the community's supporting it. But we do our public hearing the same night. So right now, we have our plan for the next couple months. We set up meetings with our principals. That is the one time that they have an opportunity to sit down in front of our superintendent. It is with our superintendent and our assistant superintendents, and they can kind of, what we say, plead their case of what their needs are for the next year. Our schools work in groups, so all of our elementary schools, like right now, we're having meetings with our executive director of elementary ed, and they're talking about what their budget priorities are, what they're going to bring to us as their priorities. And we have 12 elementary schools. We're opening a new elementary school in August. We'll have 12. So we split them up into groups of 3 or 4, depending on the schedule. And they will come in, and it's their show. They can discuss anything they want and share with the superintendent what their budget priorities are for next year. Our middle schools do the same thing. They get together, they come in a group, and then our high schools come in a group. We are a district that generally, especially if it's a new program or a new service for students, we will, if we feel like it is a high enough priority and critical enough to do something at one elementary school, we are more than likely going to do it at all elementary schools. Same thing with middle. And an example comes to mind. We used to only have 2 assistant principals at our middle schools. And our middle schools are 1,000 student capacity. And we had 2 assistant principals. And for several years, the principal said we really need a 3rd assistant principal. We want a 6th grade principal, a 7th grade principal, and an 8th grade assistant principal. And we couldn't add 6 positions at the same time. So we had a plan, and we were going to add 2 a year over the next 3 years. But we had a plan to provide that to all middle schools. So there has to really be a reason if we're going to do something at one school. Most of the time, it is we're going to do it all for elementary, we're going to do it all for middle, and all for high. Now, we like to kind of, in the budget, have a little something for everybody, but that doesn't always work out. But we usually have a plan. If we really hit elementary hard in one year, we're doing a lot for elementary. The next budget cycle, we're going to try to kind of look at what are the priorities for middle or for high schools. Does that make sense? But we don't do a lot of just individual ads for certain schools unless there's some extenuating circumstance. But we will have these meetings face-to-face, and the principals very much appreciate that, to be able to get in front of the superintendent. That way, when the board looks to the superintendent and says, okay, why is this a priority, the superintendent can say, I had the meeting with the principals, here's kind of the back of what they share with me, the details, and our superintendent feels very confident then supporting the recommendation. So we will have the face-to-face meetings coming up in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then we will start working with, on the expenditure side, what are our priorities. And I can tell you in Fort Mill, the number one priority is going to be salary increases for current employees. That is always our number one priority, because we feel like we have to take care of our own first, and we are very much concerned about retention of current employees, certainly teachers, and teacher pay is going to drive the budget for us. We're 90% of our budget is position cost. We have our budget, our general fund budget is about $234 million. 90% is position cost. But we are going to look at what can we do for teacher pay. That is going to be the driver. And then, based on what are we doing for teachers, we are going to try to do as much as we can for other support and admin staff. We are not a district, our culture is not one where we are going to increase teacher pay but not increase other staff pay. We have never been even discussed that. We are going to do across the board for all employees. Now, it might not be exactly the same percentage. And I'll give you an example. Like this year, the state has come out, and the proposal, I'm sure you've all heard, is to increase the state teacher pay scale from $47,000 to $50,000. So that's a $3,000 increase. We currently are at a starting teacher pay of $50,000. So if we increase 3,000, that's a 6% increase for a teacher with a bachelor's degree at 0 years. That's a 6% increase. I probably can't afford to do 6% on all my other scales. So I'm going to try to start running my other scales at 5% to see if I can do a cost of living at 5%. And if I can't, then I might have to drop it to 3 or 4%. But I'm going to try to see what I can do with 5%. Does that make sense? That's just how we approach it. So that's our number one funding priority. Now, we have a lot of growth. So high up there is how many new classroom teachers are we going to need? We have been forced to let our class sizes creep up. We were very fortunate for a lot of years where we had some pretty low class sizes. And, we felt like that was what we needed to do for children. And it certainly, we think, reflected in our academics. And that's our thing, is academics in Fort Mill. We are not a football school district, so you will probably never see us down here in the state championship for football. But we're an academic district. But we have let our class sizes creep up a little bit because we had to, because we needed to do some other things. And some of the other things that we have had to do comes to mind is like in the area of special ed. We really have done a push for more mental health counselors in our schools, behavior interventionists, registered behavior technicians, we call it RBTs, positions like that we had to add. So we had to look at ways to free up some funding to add some of these other type positions. So we've had to let our class sizes creep up a little bit. But those things, salary cost will be first. We'll look at any new classroom teachers second. And we are opening a new elementary school. I don't know, have y'all opened a new school lately? It is a huge hit to your budget in the first year you open a school. You're opening one too? You would just open one, so you know what I mean. So we're opening one in August. So I told our principals, we had principals meeting yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about the budget, and I said, put all your requests down, submit all your requests, but be mindful we're opening a school this year. But I said, I want you to put all your requests because every one of their requests will go to the school board. I do like a master spreadsheet and send that out to the school board. So the school board can see every school request. But I said the likelihood that we get down to some of those things is probably a lot lower this year since we're opening a school. And they understand that. And then you've got just some what I call cash out the door things that you have to account for, like insurance increases, utility increases, technology contracts. We have a lot of instructional and network technology contracts that are based on the number of staff we have, the number of students we have, and those are just normal inflationary increases that we have to account for that every year. So those are things that we call priority one, and we group ours by priorities. We'll have a priority one list, a priority 2, 3, and so forth. And priority one is just going to be those things that we have to do. And that's kind of the methodology that we've used, and that's kind of what our board is used to seeing. And they know that, okay, what's it going to take to fund priority one? And then we'll look at that. But that's kind of a big overview of how we approach it. We will, after these meetings, as a senior leadership team with the superintendent, we will come up with a recommendation for the first round to go to the school board. We think these are the priorities, school board members. This is our administrative recommendation for the budget next year, is how we do it. And then working, with our school board if they have some concerns about various areas or things they've heard that we haven't addressed. But this process, that has worked very, very well for us for a good many years. So at the state level, for those of you that are new, just to kind of, on the revenue side, while we're working through the expenditures and what our expenditure budget may look like, I am monitoring what's going on in Columbia on the revenue side. And we have passed the state superintendent of education. She has presented her budget. Governor McMaster has presented his budget. And we are getting ready for House Ways and Means. And I think they're meeting next week. Is that, does anybody know that date? I have that date somewhere. I think they are meeting, yes, February 18 through 20 is House Ways and Means Full Committee. They write the state budget. They write the beginnings of the state budget. And when it comes out, so they will debate the budget next week, and then it will have to sit on the House members' desk for a week. We probably, as finance people, we will see the budget, first budget allocations probably the first week of March. Until that time, I really can't do a lot on the revenue side because I don't know what the state revenue may look like. But once it comes out of House Ways and Means, I have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do with teacher salaries. And I don't know if y'all feel that way. I think I've got a pretty good idea now. I think the $50,000 starting is going to be the teacher salary scale for next year. I don't see the House or Senate saying, well, no, I want it to be at $49,500 or $49,750. I don't see that happening. I think they have worked so hard to get to that $50,000 level. I think that's going to be the state teacher salary scale for next year. That's just my opinion. So that's kind of what I'm working with as I start looking at our numbers. But we really will have a better idea once the budget comes out of House Ways and Means and goes to the full House. Now, when it goes to the full House, it's going to mirror the House Ways and Means. We don't usually see a lot of significant changes in the state budget between House Ways and Means version and the House because the House gets it back. So they call it House 1. They call it the House 1 version. They'll send it on to Senate Finance. And once it goes to Senate Finance, then we start getting a feel, is the Senate going to do, the Senate likes to come in and sort of be the heroes and maybe increase teacher pay more. I just don't know if they're going to have the funding, if they're going to do more than the $50,000 this year. It'd be great if they do, but I don't know that that's going to happen this year. But we watch it as it goes to Senate Finance, and we get, as school district finance people, we get an updated allocation sheet when it comes out of Senate Finance. So we start seeing, is there going to be a difference between that House Ways and Means version and that Senate Finance version? And then it goes to the full Senate. And during this time, we're probably down into April now. It won't go to the Senate till like April. So it's somewhat of a slow process. But it's very important that you watch what's going on and hear, read the School Boards Association updates. Debbie Elmore does a great job of keeping us all up to date with what's going on at the state level. And then it will go to conference committee sometime in June. Now, we go ahead, as I mentioned, we pass our budget before the final state budget's passed, just because we don't want the uncertainty of holding our budget over till July. And you can amend the budget later. If something terrible would really happen, you have the authority. You can amend your local budget later if you need to. I can only remember one time since I have been in Fort Mill that our board has amended the budget, but they amended it to the benefit of teachers. We actually did a small additional increase in teacher pay in July one year, and they amended the budget. But typically, the board sticks with the budget that they pass in June. I don't know about the Lexington districts, but teacher pay in York County is very, very competitive, and it's very secretive. And we're trying to one up each other, and we want to be the highest paying district in York County. and we were for a long time. But that Rock Hill School District came in at the last minute last year and bumped their teacher pay to $52,000. And I was like, oh my goodness. And at that point, we just said, okay, if teachers get that upset and they're going to leave and go teach in Rock Hill, you know, there's nothing we can do at that point because we'd already planned our budget. But is it that competitive here in Lexington, among the Lexington districts? Now, you don't all get together, and I think the Spartanburg districts all agree to have the same teacher pay, right? But y'all don't do that with the other Lexington? No. We don't do that either in York County.
Did you see, because of the timing of that and teacher contracts being due beginning of May,
Yes.
Did you see teachers choose to leave?
No.
Okay.
No. We have not gotten any feedback about teachers leaving because of that new I think it's a proviso, isn't it? About the date of putting out your teacher pay. But that's why we try, once we start talking publicly about teacher pay, that's our number, and we stick with that number. Now, I did want to share with you, last year, we did a complete revamp of our teacher salary schedules. And our board had gotten very concerned about some of the cells on the teacher pay scale, on the state teacher pay scale. Your young, we call them your young, new teachers in their first couple years of teaching. The incremental steps on the state teacher pay scale were so low. I think like the first couple years, it was like a $100 increase. And our board was very concerned about that because we had basically been taking the state teacher pay scale and then adding a certain percentage to it or a certain dollar amount to it. But over the years, the state teacher pay scale has gotten a little out of whack in places. And then last year was even crazier with the thought of condensing some of the degree levels and all that. So we spent a lot of time on our teacher pay scale last year, and we completely revamped it. Now, I say that to say it was not a year where every teacher got the same dollar amount or the same percentage, but we rebuilt our teacher pay scale so that it had a normal, expected upward trajectory over a teacher's career, so that if they stayed with Fort Mill over their career, they would benefit. But we had to do a lot of, email letters to teachers explaining that. Principals had meetings with teachers because before we had been about every teacher's going to get the same dollar amount or every teacher's going to get the same percentage. And that didn't happen. Anytime you do something like that, you're going to have a year of realignment. But we know that will benefit our teachers over their career. So our message to them was, if you need to jump ship to go next door, we understand. But if you stayed with us over the longevity, it's going to be more beneficial. And it fixes some of the problems between each of the cells. But it's tough when you do it that first year for your teachers to understand. Stick with us, and you'll get your normal upward increases in your teacher pay every year.
Was it just 1 year that was like that?
Yes. So now I'm at the point, this might be my Friday project tomorrow, is starting to look at hours, and if I change my starting 50,000 to the 53 and put it into all of our new formulas, I have to make sure I at least meet every cell on the state scale, which I should be fine. But that's what I'm going to look at, and then kind of see based on our scale what each of the cell differences would be from this current year to next year. Does that make sense? But it's very difficult the year you do that. It's fixing it, and I don't know how close y'all are aligning yours to the state scale, but it's very difficult when you do that the first year to explain that to your teachers. But we weathered the storm, and everybody was I won't say everybody was happy, but for the most part, they stuck with us.
Just have a quick question.
Sure.
In general, for Fort Mill School District, how much is a meal worth in your school district?
Operationally, it is worth about $355,000. Debt service, it's about $750,000. So, as I mentioned, we are about 60% residential. So, my debt millage valuation is a lot higher than my operational millage valuation. So this is just a little more detail about, as we talked about best budget practices, and as you plan and prepare, meeting with your leadership teams, meeting with your principals, you can go back and refer to that. Lots of good information. I will say the last topic, ensure sustainability. I am really careful about that, and I think that's really important. You do not want to build a budget that you cannot sustain going forward. I mean, it is wonderful for 1 year to really bump your teacher pay up, and I'm all about bumping teacher pay up, but if you don't feel like you can sustain it going forward, I think that is a concern. So I would I'm very cautionary with my school board about, when they hear things out there in the schools, when they're doing school visits, oh, we need this and that. And, I'm like, well, I don't know that we can build that much into the budget this year if we are going to sustain that going forward. So I would just say that's an area to be very, very careful about. So when we look at key issues with a budget, we certainly have to focus on enrollment. Like you, we are growing. We have new students every year. We have seen our growth somewhat slow down from what our 10-year projections were because of COVID, but we're now starting to see that picking back up again every year. And we, as I mentioned, we're opening an elementary this August, and then August of 2026, we'll be opening another middle school. So we are continuing to see the growth. We try to stay ahead of it. We're not a district who really wants to have to utilize mobile units. We get that question a lot. Well, wouldn't it, instead of having a new school under construction, couldn't we just put some more mobile units at our current schools? Yes, we could, but we think that is not a good investment of the money to buy mobile units. Our teachers don't want to teach in mobile units, and all of the safety concerns with students being in mobile units. So we have tried to stay ahead of that growth curve in Fort Mill, and that's why we've had probably more current referendums than some other districts for building schools, because we don't want to be forced to have a lot of mobile units in our district. So we update our enrollments at least once a year. Sometimes we will do a mid-year check on enrollments just because we've had a lot of growth in new neighborhoods in Fort Mill. And we use an outside demographer. Dr. Dale Holden has worked with us for many, many years. We also use the Catawba Regional Council of Governments in Rock Hill. It's the COG. They have a different methodology for how they project enrollment. And then we look at just a linear methodology, this grade level is going up a grade, and we do an average. And we have found by using 3 different methodologies and averaging that number that it has been very close to on target for us as far as growth projections for future school needs. So you have to have up-to-date enrollment numbers. That's going to drive your staffing. Our assistant superintendent for student services, he's actually in the process right now. He will have individual meetings with every principal, and they will sit down and look at the projections for their school enrollment next year, and they will look at it by grade level, by classroom. And that will determine if they feel like we need to add a teacher at that school. So when it comes to me, I'm sort of like, I don't need the details of that. I just want to know the bottom line. how many elementary teachers do we need for classroom growth, how many middle, and how many high school. Now, I get really excited because, like, I'm hearing rumors that, like, we need plus here but minus here, and that's going to net to zero. And they know I have a big smile on my face when that happens because, remember, I'm opening a school next year. So in the year, y'all know, when you're opening a school, oh, my goodness, our letters went out to teachers the other week. You know, they get to pick, they get to submit their priorities of where they want to teach next year. And then we have some elaborate, you know, HR has some elaborate system of points, and they decide what teachers are going to the new school and who's got to move around. And that's one thing that's very uncomfortable in Fort Mill. I mean, we went through a lot of years where if we had growth at a school, we would just add a teacher there. But we cannot do that anymore with the funding constraints. So we have to look at sometimes having to move teachers between schools. And that's very, very difficult, I understand. Now, once teachers start the year at a school, we don't go in and change classes. If we have we call it a bubble, and we get to August or early September and we have a bubble that's happened over the summer with growth at a school, we will add a teacher. We will add a teacher. We won't move someone from another school. So we will add a teacher during that time period if we have to. Now, the way that I do that in the budget is any new positions that we need, I'm going to budget a teaching position at a master's degree and 12 years experience. So I'm going to go right in the middle of the teacher pay scale as my average. Now, we're going to hire some teachers that have less experience. They only have a bachelor's degree, and we're going to hire some teachers that have more years experience. But on average, that's what I use, is that amount for the cost of a teacher. And that usually gives me enough funding in the budget that if we have a few bubbles and need to add a few teachers in the fall, that we can do that. Does that make sense? And I'm comfortable with that. And it's worked well. That's worked well for us as far as from a budget standpoint. A couple other things you have to look at. We've all dealt with the past couple years with ESSER 1, 2, and 3 funding, and I'm sure you had people paid out of those funds like we did. It was a wonderful thing to have ESSER funding, but it was something that we had to keep monitoring. How many positions do we have in each of those categories? And I kept my board very informed because every year in the last couple budgets, I'm like, okay, we got to move these people that were in ESSER 1 to the general fund, ESSER 2, and then last year the ESSER 3. Now I still deal with it with IDEA funding and Title I funding, where our funding is not going up, but teacher pay is going up, benefits are going up, and sometimes I might have to move one or two people that we can no longer fund out of the federal funding. As I said, I get very little federal funding proportionately because I'm only 18% free and reduced lunch. And I only have 2 Title I schools. So that's a challenge for us. Technology, most of our larger technology items we fund either in a bond referendum or we fund out of an annual, I call it 8% bond issue. Do y'all know what that is when I say 8% bond issue, where you have authority to issue debt up to 8% of your assessed value? We do an annual bond issue. It could be anywhere from $4 million to $8 million. And if we need to, we will put larger technology replacements, things like that, in that bond funding. I just don't have enough capacity in the general fund to do a lot of technology outside of just the annual technology contracts that we have to pay for. Maintenance, boy, that continues to be a big ticket item. I mean, even outside of utility and cleaning costs, we outsource cleaning. But the normal maintenance of the schools, just the repairs and supplies, we have to look at that every year in the budget, and that's going to be a priority 1 item because we're going to keep up our schools and do what we need to. That's a huge asset, a huge item that the taxpayers have paid for with these buildings, and we want to maintain them, protect that asset. Now, we also I don't know if any of you were at the school board's conference a couple years ago. We did a little presentation. We have a pretty extensive district rental program where we rent out our school facilities. We had a lot of push from our community because we just don't have a lot of venues in the Fort Mill TAK area for rental spaces. And we got a lot of questions about, why can't we have this event at one of your schools, in the commons area, in the gym. And so we really developed a very extensive rental program that we use. And we just changed systems, and everyone's very happy with it. We're on Facilitron, if you wanted to look that up. But we do a lot of rental of our school facilities. Now, our schools get first priority, but they have to put all of their calendar plans in the system. We have a full-time district rental facilitator, so our rental income pays for her position, and then we use it for some of the upkeep, but we rent our fields. We work very closely with the town of Fort Mill, the city of TAK, rec departments, with field usage, gym usage, cafeteria usage, and things like that. So we have really found that to be beneficial, and it's a goodwill for the community also, because they see that we are making our spaces available for rental. But we cover the cost on it. So the general fund, I keep this in a separate fund, all accounted for separately. It does not involve the general fund at all. Any funding, any revenue that comes in over the expenses for a given year stays in that fund and is kept separate.
Do you know kind of an idea of what you charge? Are the fees pretty low? Are they?
They're not low.
So
you can go on our website.
Okay.
I want to say we'll have I'm really going off the top of my head, but maybe for like an elementary gym, it might be a base fee of $500, and then for so many hours. But for like our high school auditoriums, probably yours too, they are so in demand from these companies doing pageants, dance recitals, so that every weekend is booked up in the spring, especially for our high school auditoriums. But we make sure we make the rentor, we have a school administrator there that they have to pay for, cleaning crew there, and sound, like in our auditoriums. We have one of our district personnel from the school who knows how to run that sound equipment booth there. And the renter has to pay for that. But we have one of our school administrators or a designated person from that school at that event, and they get paid an hourly rate for serving as the liaison for us at that event. But it has been, we've continued to develop that, and that's probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, we really went kind of full-time with a person devoted to that. But it's really worked well. It's really worked well for our community.
Do you have an idea of, generally, I won't hold you to it, how
Yep.
much revenue that drives for you?
Couple hundred thousand. Yeah. It's worth doing it if you do it to that full extent and you really look at charging what you need to cover your cost for that. But like I say, a lot of it comes from our relationship with our Parks and Rec groups that use our field space and our elementary gym space for their programs as well. But we have a great relationship with them, and it works. It works well. We talked a lot about teacher pay, so let's move on. I think you probably know most of this. Just quick recap on local revenue is primarily property taxes. Rentals I put here. I keep all the rentals of our facilities separate. I have a little bit of rentals, like for some cell tower usage, things like that I put in the general fund. Outside tuition, we have just a handful of students who pay outside tuition. that is a huge discussion right now with us with what's going on, the state Senate Bill 62. We have been a district who did not allow outside students to come to our district because of our growth. We just could not accommodate more students on top of our own students, but we have to follow the state law. So we have a handful of families that will have a piece of property in the student's name that has an assessed value of at least $300, which that's only about $5,000 of fair market value. So that's easy to get in Fort Mill, but we only have a handful. But they do pay a tuition, and I have a calculation on that I've kept the same for consistency for years. And right now our tuition is in a range of between $8,000 and $9,000, depending on if you're in county or out of county. That goes into our general fund, but that's not a lot of funding. Interest income, you, I'm sure, like us, have benefited from the market rates over the last year or two. That's an item that I am never going to budget high because you just don't know what's going to happen with interest rates. But we've really gotten the benefit of some interest income coming into to our general fund and our debt fund, but specifically in our general fund. And then I'm going to talk about the state aid to classroom, the new formula. And as I mentioned, I'm very low in federal revenue. So let's talk about the new state funding formula. I saw this somewhere, or somebody gave it to me. I thought, boy, this sums it up. Because if you are new with us, let me tell you, things used to be so easy. We didn't know how easy it was, but I could feel very good about going into a budget and knowing that, okay, I might have a projection of 800 new students for next year. And usually I would budget about 50% of that. I would say, well, I'm comfortable including about 400 new students, and I could take my 400 students times my state per pupil amount, and I could get really close on what our state revenue was going to be. There is no way. So when Jennifer stands up here and says, y'all, I can't tell you how much state revenue we're going to get until I get that spreadsheet that has the number, that is absolutely the truth. I have heard every school district CFO say that. Have we not, Jennifer? Every school district CFO has said the same thing. I've had a lot of my friends say, oh my goodness, it came out and I got the email and I was really afraid to look at it. That's how we feel because we cannot project this. It is, whenever they send us the spreadsheet and it has the number, I'm one of those that annoys them, and I email back and I say, can you send me the whole spreadsheet because I want to see other districts. And so I get the whole spreadsheet, and it's this massive Excel spreadsheet. And I love Excel, but there are so many things on there you cannot figure out. You are at the mercy of this formula that is truly like this because it's all about proportionate share. Now, in my opinion, I was probably the district that got hurt the most by the new education funding formula, especially when the poverty weighting went from 0.2 to 0.5. And remember, I'm the lowest poverty district. So I really got hurt. But the other thing that's really hurting all of us is the charter schools are now in the formula. Before, charter schools had their own bucket, their own state bucket of money, and their own formula. Now, they are in this formula, and what we're seeing is that is significantly affecting our amount. And that's really still, I don't think, we've tried for years, for the last couple years, to say this isn't working, please go back to the old method. I don't think it's going to happen. But if they could just pull out charter schools and fund them separately, it might make a lot more sense. But we literally do not know what our number is until we get that email with that spreadsheet.
Do y'all sponsor any charter schools?
We do not. We do not. I keep getting wind. We'll get the little emails that say they put in application. Don't you get the little emails that say they put in application? Rock Hill has a couple. but we do not have any that we sponsor in Fort Mill. But I'm not against charter schools. I just don't want them in my funding formula because it makes it so uncertain. So I think that is one of the biggest factors right now. And we get the projections, and we passed the budget 2-3 weeks ago. We got the update for the 45-day counts. And literally, when I looked at mine, I was just breathing a sigh of relief that I just about broke even. I mean, I am afraid I'm going to open that and I'm going to have, decreased $1 million or something. Because we don't know what the proportionate, even though I'm growing, I don't know what my proportionate share of growth is to other districts. The other problem, so I'm just sharing some tidbits if you get in the ears of some of our House and Senate members. The other problem, I think, is with the dependency on every district has got to report accurately. It is so dependent on your weightings, on your power school reporting, on your classification of students. Power school, y'all probably know this, but those power school people, I would be buying them donuts or something frequently because they are one of the most important people in the schools. Those power school people are critical, and what they're reporting has to be accurate. And I used to not care, if my neighboring districts, if they overclassified special ed for whatever reason, if they, were more aggressive than we are, it didn't really affect me. So, that was on them, or if they misreported across the state. But it affects me now because it's taking money away from me. If somebody in the state is messing up on their reporting, it is affecting you, it's affecting us, because it's all about the proportional share of your numbers. Does that make sense? And so I am a big advocate, about let's do more statewide audits of some of this coding, because we look at that as very important in Fort Mill. I've become really good friends with the Power School group at my district office. We have 3 people who do Power School at our district office. And I really work closely with them, and they understand the importance, and they're then giving direction and guidance to all of the Power School clerks, specialists at each school. When we have a Power School vacancy, I ask one of them to sit in on the interview committee. That's how strong I feel about it. Because, for sometimes principals, I hear this all the time. For a position like that or a bookkeeper at the school, they'll be like, oh, I just love this person. They've been a classroom and instructional assistant in my school for so long, and they're so nice, and they understand the culture. And I think that's great, but there are certain skills required in a school bookkeeper job and a Power School position. And I want the Power School staff at the district office to be involved in making a recommendation to that principal. So I ask the principals to let one of them sit in on their interview committee for that reason. But Power School, it is extremely important that that is accurate, and that they understand how important they are to your district. I don't know how much time y'all spend talking about Power School, but I spend a lot of time at my district because of that. So when the state funding formula came out, this was the thing. It was going to simplify. This is what the state said. It's going to simplify. It's going to increase accountability. Well, we think we're already pretty accountable in Fort Mill, but we were fine with that because it didn't really change our day-to-day. And it was going to allow greater flexibility. Now, they've rolled up a lot of funds into this formula that we used to get separate little pots of money. But it's kind of that shell game where they're rolling up money, but they're not really giving you more. And then, as we said, it's about your proportionate share and your index of tax-paying ability, which the index calculation is still in the formula. That's what looks at the wealth of your district. But the flaw in that is that still has the residential piece. So I've got all these homes in Fort Mill, but I'm not getting any general fund revenue off those homes under Act 388, but it's still in this formula. So I'm getting less state money because my assessed value on the tax roll is going up. And then it's based on, what does it cost a district based on your average daily membership, how many teachers, and they value a teacher at $75,891. Now, that was last year's number. And this 11.2 pupil-teacher ratio. Well, I don't know about you, but we don't have any classes that only have 11.2 students to teachers. But this is what the formula is based on right now. But it is complicated. That's my message today. It is complicated. So let's talk a little bit about Act 388. It's a significant annual decrease for us. We look at every year what would we be collecting in tax revenue if we were collecting on homes versus what we are collecting. And right now we are short about $40 million a year. So we could really reduce our tax millage if we were collecting on homes again. But each year, you as a school board, you can increase your tax millage by the consumer price index percentage plus your population growth. So I gave you a little handout in here. I think this is just interesting to see. Let me show you. This is the handout, and this is every district in South Carolina. And, of course, everyone has the same CPI factor, which was 4.12%. And then it has the population factor, and then what's your maximum growth. So last year for Lexington 1, you had growth of 2.78 plus the 4.12, so 6.9%. So you had the legal authority as the school board to increase your tax millage 6.9% over the prior year. And that's just a multiplication of what your prior year millage times that, and that's what you have the authority to increase. You had the authority to increase for this year. Now, let me see if so because of our growth, because of our state funding situation, we're a district who has had to increase our tax millage on a regular basis. And my school board's used to that. They know in my seat, I am going to bring them these numbers, and I'm going to say, this is the chart for this year. Once I know the consumer price index number, I go ahead and share that with them. I multiply it times our current millage, and I say, okay, we're at this amount now, and then I'll say later, here's the final population, here's what you can do. So I bring to them that number and say, this is what you can do, and here's what the needs are. And I think I told you how I prioritize my list. So, yes, I made you a copy. This was my general fund budget, the current year that we're in. And this is how I do it. So I will put the things that are priority one, as I mentioned, like the salary increase, the new teachers, the maintenance, utilities, and I will subtotal it, and then I will say, okay, it's going to cost $14.5 million in new money to fund these things, and I know that I'm going to get an increase in state funding of $2.6 million. I'm going to get some other state funds of 3.6, and my tax projection from growth, just my increase in assessment, 2.3. So to do these Category 1 items, Fort Mill School Board, it's going to take 16.8 mils to do Category 1. So I give it to the school board in priority groupings and say, if we do priority 1 items only, it's going to cost this tax millage. If you want to add some of the items from priority 2, you're going to have to increase another 3 mils, and so on and so on. That's generally how I lay it out. because unfortunately we are just a district, and it's a tough seat. I understand you're in a tough seat when it comes to taxes. But our school board, to really maintain our facilities, to maintain our teacher pay, we are in a situation of tax millage increases.
And so the implication obviously falls on your businesses.
Absolutely.
And so do you guys have continual communication with them? Do they support the work that the district
They do. They do support it because it is, we look at it like it increases their opportunities for running their business, whether they are a service business in our community, a restaurant, that type of thing. We are getting the growth of people. We are getting the increase in business volume. They have more coming through their business. So we kind of work with them on saying this goes hand in hand. You know, we want to be a desirable area for people to live and work and go out to eat and shop and those kind of things and use your services. And it could be medical services, those type of things. So we try to continue to educate our community on it goes hand in hand. Now, we have a lot of people who've moved from other states, and so we're continuing to explain to them, those business owners, about what goes on in South Carolina with education funding and where we have had the problem with the constraints and the decreases in education funding and why, unfortunately, we have to look at the other side with the taxes. Now, we are...
Can I interrupt you one
Sure.
second? One more question on the business stuff. Do you have a concept of the percentage that are large business, franchise business versus small business within your area?
I would probably say we're more middle business. We're more middle. One of the largest new businesses to go on the tax roll was 2 years ago. Piedmont Medical Center opened a new hospital, and that came on, and that was about $1.8 million in new tax revenue for us. That was one of the largest ads on the commercial side that we've had in a while, but it's a lot of small to medium-sized type businesses for us.
You get tax revenue from the hospital?
We do. Now, there was a huge, you probably saw some of this in the media, 10 years it went on about who was going to build the hospital in Fort Mill, and 2 of them were nonprofit hospitals. Piedmont was a for-profit hospital. So they were the ones that received the certificate of need, the CON, and ultimately built the hospital. So you can imagine during that process, we were closely watching that because we wanted to make sure they didn't get a fee in lieu arrangement after they sold themselves to the community based on we're going to pay the taxes. So I wanted them to pay the taxes. So far, they have not requested a fee in lieu, thank goodness. So they came on the tax roll for us. But we are in, I think I saw, are y'all in a reassessment year this year? I think y'all are on the same cycle as York County. So this will be a year of reassessment. When we are in a year of reassessment, all 4 York County school districts work together. We all want to use the same spreadsheet. We want to do the same calculation because we don't want anybody coming back and questioning us. So when you're in a year reassessment, just for you new school board members, by state law, we can't receive an increase in tax revenue because of someone's property value went up. So you have to roll back taxes to account for that. But also, you can then add on any millage you've left on the table for the past 3 years. So in 2020, when we did reassessment, we did that where we roll back to a certain amount and then we added back a little bit that we had left on the table. It's just a little easier in the year of reassessment because you're still decreasing your tax millage. You're just not decreasing it quite as much. I don't have any. We've increased our taxes the maximum we could the last couple years, so I don't have any millage on the table this year. to go to. So I'm really going to be at the mercy of what the reassessment numbers look like for us this year. So moving on,
Can I get a quick question in?
Sure.
Going back to your raging millage, and I know it hits businesses harder. Has there been any talk with lack of business coming in because of that?
None for us. None for us. Or at least it didn't get to our, it wasn't specifically directed at because tax, Now, we get the complaint, school taxes are high. I love it. Your county probably does the same thing. The tax bills go out and they have these nice, pretty charts with the bar graphs or the pie, and the school line is like hitting the end of the page. I'm like, I really wish they wouldn't do that because it just doesn't look good. But it's just the reality of what we're faced with. I mean, our community wants us to attract and retain the best teachers. They want us to stay competitive with teacher pay and keep education operating at the level we do. And the offset is for us has to be the tax revenue on that. So we talked about local tax base. We talked about some of the history. And the budget calendar we talked about, and you guys said you do your public hearing the same time we do, the same night, so you just have to advertise 15 days before. A couple key things that I always look at is I mentioned about sustainability, what's happening with your tax base. I've been fortunate in that I haven't had any significant appeals, where we've had companies that appeal their taxes or I've been really fortunate with that. Mine's been steady with a small amount of growth. Now, I use my prior year tax collections as my starting point. My county auditor sends me the projected assessment values for next year, but I'm more comfortable using my actual collections, and then I'll add a conservative growth percentage. I'll usually use 3% for my growth percentage to project my taxes. I'm more comfortable with that than working from my assessed value, because with the actual tax collections, I've already got any uncollectible taxes accounted for by using that number. So you could use it. I hear CFOs talk about it both ways. I'm just more comfortable with that approach for mine. And we talked about our budget goals. One thing I'll mention, when our principals send in their budget request, I have a little form, and they have to put the detail, if they're requesting a new program or a new position, but they have to tie it to the district strategic plan. They have to identify what part of the strategic plan it is addressing, and it has to be tied to that for us. So this was in my public presentation last spring for our budget. I am always going to take a balanced budget to my school board. I am not an advocate for using fund balance to balance your budget unless it's a very short window that you're going to recover from. I think that's just a very dangerous slope. So I am going to bring a balanced budget. I mentioned we're real big on recruiting and retaining staff. That's why we look at our salary schedules as our number one funding priority. Reasonable class sizes, that's our new word we use now, a reasonable class size instead of a low class size. And we have to be in compliance with state regulations. That affects us sometimes with guidance counselor ratios and those type of things where we've had to add some positions. I told you at the beginning we try to do it in groups, grade level groups, but we may have a school that we're really out of compliance, like with guidance, and we might have to add an additional guidance counselor just at that one high school for that reason. And then we continued to, this was last year, we did the last piece of pulling over ESSER. I talked about the budget calendar. You can look at this. This is my actual document for this year. Those are my dates as I go through March and April and May with our board meetings and what we're going to present to our board. I said our staffing is 90% of our budget. These are our current ratios that we try to maintain. We really try to start out a little lower just because we know certain areas where we're going to grow at certain schools. As our assistant superintendent of student services has those meetings with principals, we know if there is a certain neighborhood that's coming on that's under construction, especially like an elementary. We have one right now, it's called Elizabeth, and it is really picking up in construction and build out. And we know it's going to affect that certain school. So we may try to keep their ratios a little lower going into next year because we know over the summer we're going to see more families, houses completed, and families moving in to that school.
Just clarifying, so like for the 9th through 10th grade and 11th through 12th grade, the 1 to 26 and 1 to 28 ratio, is that how you calculate your FTEs, or those are the actual class sizes?
They look at, for high school, they're going to look at the actual scheduling in the core areas like math, science, social studies. Mm-hmm. They're going to look at that ratio in those core areas as far as do we need an additional English teacher? Do we need an additional math teacher?
Right. I think what I'm asking is, do you take, if you have 1,000 students in a school, do you divide it by 26 or 28?
No.
That's how your FTEs are calculated?
No. We look more at individual classes at the high school level, down to that degree with scheduling and how many students are going to be in each of those classes.
So how do you calculate your FTEs at like a high school?
They look at and I'm not a good one to answer because
okay.
Remember, I tell them just to come to me and give me the bottom line.
Yeah.
So, but they look at, because the principal, I love our high school principals and they're wonderful, but they're going to come into that meeting saying, I need all these new teachers for all these classes.
Right.
And they really spend a lot of time with our district office admin and talk about that and try to get that number down because of that. But they really look at each individual course and then look at the electives at the high school level. We don't just say, okay, Fort Mill High School has X number of students divided by 26. You have this many FTEs. We don't really look at it like that, like each school can only have this number of FTEs. We look at it more by grade band or content. Does that make sense? Because we work more with, I guess, maybe we're a little more controlling, but we don't just say to our principals, okay, you have X number of FTEs for your school. We have these elaborate charts that have every grade level. You know, how many first grade teachers do you have? How many second, third grade, like that for your school for the projections for next year. Yeah. Do y'all do that different? You do? Okay. I mean, our principals would probably love if we weren't so involved and we just said, you know. But I also don't say, principals, I want you to go out there and hire the youngest teacher you can find because that's going to help our budget either. But the board does laugh at me in the board meetings when HR gives out the new hires and the board's going to approve them and it has all the information. How many teachers do we have with 0 years, 1 year, and then we'll have a teacher with 25 years. And they're like, I'm like, I know. Who hired a teacher with 25 years experience? That really messes up my averages, you know. Our state SCASBO Association did a great job putting together this document, and I put it in your packet just to share with you, just talking about fund balance and, you know, why fund balance is so important. I purposely keep my general fund balance at 18 to 19% of my next year's budget. And I sort of manipulate that a little bit to that number because I don't really need that number to go higher because I know what I need from a cash flow to get me through the fall months until taxes come in, like the September, October, November timeframe before the tax bills go out and I start getting tax collections. So I can operate comfortably without having to get any tax anticipation note, a TAN. So I keep my fund balance at 18 to 19%. So having said that, when I get to year end, if I see that, oh, I have a couple $1,000,000 more than I need to go into my general fund balance, I will then go to our board, we call it our year-end transfer, and we will pull that money out for certain one-time expenditures. We may have some capital projects we need to address. We may have some shortfalls in another area. We also have, we call it a contingency fund. We have a separate fund because we've had to open so many schools so quickly. We will put some funding in that contingency fund that we will move back in when, like, I will use part of that this year to open that school because I just can't generate enough revenue in 1 year, in a year I'm opening a school. So I will be very purposeful on what I want my general fund ending fund balance to be. Now, I'll have to increase it every year because my budget's growing. And so if I want to keep that same 18 to 19%, I've got to put some in to maintain that level. But I'm just don't let mine grow past that for that reason. And I'll have a list of some things that the board will approve to use it for. A lot of times it's things that were budget requests, not positions, but one-time type expenditures that were budget requests that didn't make the budget. Like we've had a lot of curriculum items, and we've worked hard over the last couple of years to pull those into what I call the recurring general fund budget. But if there's some things they need that we couldn't fund in the budget, I may have it on that year-end transfer list. And so the board knows when I go and say, here's our year-end transfers, they know what that is because they've seen that consistently the last, prior years. And that's just how we manage that. If we have any tax revenue may come in, because remember, I'm going to use a 3% growth percentage. If I get tax collections over that, I'm going to have some excess funding from that I may not need to increase my general fund balance, so I'll pull it out purposefully. But knowing that that is one-time money and not recurring dollars. We can't use that to match Rock Hill on the teacher salary scale or anything like that. But we can use it for one-time type expenditures. So I thought that might be useful for you to read. And then this is just related to, communications. As I mentioned, I'm sure you receive a monthly financial report. I do that for our school board as well. And as far as the budget, I said there's comfort in a consistent format. We use the same. We're always open to new ideas, but we generally have found the way that we do our budget, it works for us, it works for our schools, it works for our community. And they're used to, they understand it. So we stick with that, and we're consistent with that. This is kind of fun, things that can go wrong. Don't forget to post your public hearings. I know y'all aren't going to do that. I like triple check it 3 times in the paper and get a couple copies and cut it out, to make sure for the auditors. Talked about fund balance, one-time revenues, overestimating, underestimating expenditures. Jennifer and I were talking before. We're in the June 30th. It is the worst seed in the world because if we end the year and we have money, then everyone's going to look at us and go, oh, well, you said we had to increase taxes, Leanne, and we really didn't. Why'd you make us increase taxes? Now we have profit. We have money. But I do not want to be standing in front of my school board or my superintendent saying we're in the red. And because I, overestimated the revenue, I underestimated the expense. I do not want to be in that seat. So I'll take the hit for having a little bit of money at year end any day. I do not want to put us in that other situation. We have to submit our mill levy to the county. I'm sure you get those nice letters from your county like I do. And student enrollment forecast, very, very important. And then ask questions as you go through the process. I would say ask questions and watch what's going on down the road in Columbia. You're right here to really monitor what's going on at the state level. And here's just a few ideas. When dollars are short, I said we've had to stretch our class sizes. Now we call it, a reasonable class size level, making sure teachers are teaching the number of periods, cross-training. I'll briefly mention energy costs. That's been a big push for us because we really started getting concerned about, and we have relatively new schools, about our energy cost and what could we do. So we've actually just signed a contract with Schneider Electric. We have been very pleased with them. We are doing a energy debt, but we're going to repay the debt from the guaranteed savings on that contract and that equipment every year. And I did this years ago when I was with Rock Hill School District, and I did not have a good experience with it. And I said, I'm never going to do this again. But it is going extremely well. And I heard Snyder present at a conference, and then I reached out to them, and we did bids. And there's a handful of companies that do this, and I'm sure they all do a great job. But if you ever decide to look into this, please give us a call. I'm glad to talk about it. But we are at the stage that we've signed the contract, and they're getting ready to start installing the equipment for us. But it took us about 8 or 9 months through the process. They came in and did assessments at all of our schools. And I just can't tell you how surprised I was, even at our new schools. I mean, how quickly the technology has changed on lighting and some of the plumbing fixtures and things like that. And it is amazing the savings potential out there related to some of this, that we felt like, well, this is kind of a win-win for our community. If we can repay the cost of this equipment from the guaranteed savings and then incur more savings down the road, why would we not try this? And so it has been wonderful. We are very much in the middle of that energy savings project right now.
What's the time frame for the?
About 2 years. About 2 years.
So after 2 years, you'll start recouping the cost.
Yeah. Well, 2 years the project will be finished. Complete. It's about a 24-month project.
How long, so the
probably 8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. I'm really going off the top of my head. I'm thinking about one of their presentations, but something like that. But so far, it is going extremely well for us. And the reason that I got interested in this again, Spartanburg 7 did this project with them in the last couple years as well, and spoke very highly of them and the success they had had. So that's what triggered us to get interested in that. And then shared services, one that comes to mind for us, we have just one York County Adult Ed program. Clover School District houses that and administers that, and then we just pay them. That's an example of something we've shared with the other districts. And then I said just reviewing supplements. And here's a list of just some things, if you have any questions about that. But we're always trying to just look at ways that we can be more efficient and lower our cost. Because, I love it when somebody says to me, let me come in and look at your general ledger because I can save you money. Well, and I say, yeah, you can save me money, but the things that we do, we're prioritizing. Where would you like us to cut services to our students, cut our position? I mean, it is all a matter of what are you prioritizing, how you want to spend your money. We can all spend less and save money. I'll be the first to say that. But, are we not going to have a school psychologist in every school? Are we not going to have mental health counselors? Those kind of services that we're providing to our students, those are the things that we're choosing to do and that are extra. And then I would just say be careful comparing among districts because we're all a little different. But generally for me, I'm 90% salaries. I'm 3 to 5% fixed overhead. And then the rest is professional development, supplies, or safety. So, to really reduce my budget significantly, I would have to reduce people. I mean, I can't save enough dollars with just supply purchases to amount to much. And we don't do an exorbitant amount of professional development. We do a lot of in-house, which I'm sure you do as well. So we don't have a lot of outside travel across our district that's devoted to that. And then just a couple final thoughts. It has to be a plan that works for you, for your community. In most cases, you're going to put the students and the teachers first, like we do. Stay in touch with the process. We've talked a lot about sustaining it. No need to be fancy. I stick with the same forms. Every year I think before I send it out to the principals, do I need to make this look fancier? Do I need to change it? And I don't, because they're used to it. They know what I expect. They know how to fill them out. And so I stick with the same process for that reason. I stick with the same documents that I present to the public as I'm on the agenda in the next couple months for the board meetings and how I present the budget. I do the priority list. I just stick with that because it works for us and our community is used to that. So, and then, why are we all doing this? We're all doing this to get those high schoolers graduated. These were our 3 high school graduations last year. It's one of the funnest days, one of the proudest days for us as district administration, just to see those kids walk. That's why we're doing it. So, any questions? Or I just want to touch on impact fees if I can. Can I have like 5 or 10 minutes? Okay.
Is that okay, Dr. Postlewaite?
Yes,
So,
that'll be fine.
Impact fees do you all know what impact fees are? Is that a new word or y'all? So in 2016, Representative Ray Felder, who she retired from the House last year, but she was able to get the wording changed in the impact fee law, the South Carolina Developmental Impact Fee Act, to add school districts. And so we had been grandfathered in prior to that under an old law where we were charging $2,500 for a new home. And Fort Mill had been doing that since, I believe, 2006. And we could use it for construction or debt service. So we would use it toward reducing our debt service millage. In 2016, the law changed, and it had some different requirements, and we started working with our county at that time. To do an impact fee, you have to have a comprehensive impact fee plan study developed. To do that, the stuff you're already doing, your enrollment projections, plans for new schools, the construction cost. We use a consultant out of Maryland, Tischler Weiss, and they did our comprehensive impact fee study. They, at the time, that was in 2018, we worked through, you have to by law, this is a county enacted impact fee. The county has to pass the ordinance. The local school board cannot pass the ordinance. So they passed our ordinance. We had to go to the planning commission, 3 readings, and a public hearing. Our new impact fee was passed in July of 2018. At the time, we were still hopeful that we could use impact fee funds to pay down debt service, but the county did not agree with us. So we went into litigation with the county. We went all the way to the South Carolina Supreme Court, and the South Carolina Supreme Court ruled in our favor in March of 2021 and said that we did everything proper. Our study met the law. So during that time, we were collecting a lot of impact fees. Our new number was $18,158 for a home and $12,020 for a multifamily, which is an apartment. So after we received the favorable ruling, we then told the county was still in disagreement with us about using it for debt. They said you can only, under the new state law, use it for construction. And we said, okay, but we need to amend our plan to add more schools because we've already had to build the schools we were going to use it for. Potentially, I've had to go out and get the debt to build those schools. So we got all that resolved with the county, and I'm going to give you the bottom line. We've collected $73 million. We collected $73 million in impact fees. We are building our elementary school that is Flint Hill Elementary. It's opening in August. We call it the cash-free elementary. It's 100% paid with impact fees, no bonded debt, and we have now collected enough to pay for that school, and we're now using funds toward the construction of our next middle school, which will open a year from now. So our impact fee will expire this July. So we are now in the process of working with the county we had a new impact fee study done, completed, using the same consultants. Our new number, because of the increase in construction costs, our new number is $29,640 on a new home per house, and $22,000 on an apartment. So we went to the Planning Commission, the York County Planning Commission, in December. They took a vote in January. We got a 7-0 vote, positive, out of Planning Commission. So we are now starting with first reading of the York County Council on March 3rd. We're having a public hearing. We are pulling out all the stops like we did last time. We're bringing the school people, wearing all their school colors to show how important this is to our community. Because if we did not have impact fees, we would have had to have bonded debt on these two schools. So I just want to share that with you because I know your district talked about this at one point because of your growth. And if you decide ever to revisit this, we are glad to help because we want to see more school districts taking advantage and continuing to show the General Assembly how important this is, because every time something about it comes up in the General Assembly, we've got the home builders saying, no, 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 it's curbing growth. It has not curbed any growth in Fort Mill. And the average, I don't know what your average price of a home, but the average price of a home in Fort Mill, TAK is $650,000. So our argument is, adding this additional $29,000 is just not that big a deal in the whole scheme of things. We will see what happens. I think best case scenario, we will continue at the level we are. I don't think the county council would now say no more impact fees because they are seeing this new school being built with impact fees. It's kept, the county collects it at permit time. I get a report every morning, so I see what was paid the day before. And I tell my school board, if it's just like 1 or 2 a day, it'll be in the email. But if it's a lot, it'll be an attachment. And so I get really excited when it's an attachment. I open it up and it's like a dozen. So it's very volatile. You can go a couple of days and have no permits paid. And then I can tell when a builder goes in and will permit a whole street because I'm starting to recognize the addresses too on certain neighborhoods. And so I get that every morning. I'm tied into the county system. And I request drawdowns as we're in construction on this new school. And I get reimbursement from the county based on the construction pay apps that I submit. So I think we'll keep the impact fee, worst case, at the same level. But we're hearing some pretty positive things that we might get the full amount. So that would be a huge benefit for our taxpayers going forward if we can now jump to that level. But as you know, that is what it costs now, the per seat for a child in one of our schools with the construction costs as they are today. Construction costs have gone up 30 to 50% on some types of construction items. So that is just, I would just say please revisit that if you think you have an opportunity with your growth, because it is a revenue stream that is allowable by the law. And it is a huge benefit to the taxpayers. So I just wanted to make sure. I'm glad to answer any questions, or later on if y'all decide to look into that. We have learned a lot about it from now going through the process twice. So we are glad to share and help in any way we can. So,
I have one question
Sure.
on that. I don't know much about your municipalities. Do you just have the county, or do you have any towns within?
we have Town of Fort Mill and City of TOK.
Okay, and do they levy impact fees?
They have a
already?
little bit. I know the Town of Fort Mill does. I think it's more tied to like some infrastructure cost that they have. But we have an impact fee, and Clover School District has an impact fee. So 2 of the 4 York County school districts have impact fees. So our county works with us as well as with Clover on their impact fee.
And I had a question in terms of the impact fee, it is being assessed to the developer before he's ever released
Correct.
a permit to start doing
Correct.
anything.
It is paid at the time of permitting and then passed on in the cost of the home. So,
Our average home price is not anywhere near
No?
yours.
Right.
No.
It-
No, it's probably more around 300, I would say.
I mean, it's really hard right now for new teachers. I mean, we've had teachers who we've recruited from other states and who want to come teach in Fort Mill, and they will come down, and in the summer they will contact us and say, I just don't think I can come because I just can't afford to live there.
Right.
And we hate that for them. We hate that. So our housing costs have gone extremely high now in that area. But okay, well, thank you so much for
Thank
having
you,
me
Ms.
today,
Lordo.
and I hope it's been helpful again for those of you who heard it the second time.
Thank you so much for
Sure.
your time. All right, moving on to item 3.2. As we begin the budget process, Dr. Rivers is going to go over enrollment trends and projections.
Good morning, everyone. You just had a very thorough school finance lesson, so it's amazing information that was shared that will factor into your decisions that you're going to make. What I'm going to share with you now is just really an overview of kind of school enrollment and projections, and just to give you an idea of what the district average daily membership looks like. Let's see if we can get that presentation up. Just do the clicker. There we go. That's what my guy in the back says. Just do the clicker. There it is. So I wish I made a slide for this, but I'm going to try to explain it so you can understand average daily membership and student enrollment or head count. They're two different things. And so, as Leanne said, the Power School folks, we call them our student data specialists, and then also attendance secretaries, they are very, very important. Having accurate attendance in your schools drives your funding for a school district and a school. And so when you think about average daily membership, my quick explanation for that, if you look at a 10-day or a school enrollment, it just says 100 students. That's how many students who are listed in your school for as head count. But in a 5 or 10-day period, say 80 students come to school. And that's what you're going to be funded on, which is 80%, so 80 students. So your average daily membership in a week, 10 days or whatever, if only 80 students come to school, or if you are off and you are marking up attendance, you would then get funded for only 80% of the enrollment. So the enrollment could be 100 students, but showing up on average, you have 80 students. So when we think about ADM, average daily membership, we sometimes cross it over with enrollment. No, it's a picture of what the school district's average daily membership is over a time period. So we look at it and we report data to the State Department. The student records operators, they help us with that, our student data specialists, on the 45-day and the 135th day. So at the end of our first 9 weeks or halfway through that first 9-week period, we report numbers to the State Department, and then on the end of the third 9 weeks, we collect average daily membership, and that number is reported to the State Department. So this is a graph that we keep, and it tracks our attendance. It's been tracking it from 2011 to present. And I'll show you a chart in just a minute that gives you kind of a better overview of what's taking place. So you can see how that graph in District Lexington 1 enrollment has increased from 2011 all the way to right around 2019, 2020. So we all kind of know what happened in that time period. A pandemic occurred, and so that's when enrollment dipped that following year. And so after that year of the pandemic, there was a resurgence of families coming back to the school district. And so you see that increase in the data there in 2021, 2022, and 2022, 2023 is when the enrollment in Lexington 1 peaked. And so that 27,304 is on the 135th day average. That's when we peaked in enrollment at that period of time. Since then, there are factors that I won't get into completely, but there are factors across the entire state and nation that started to impact student enrollment post-pandemic. And so generally speaking, you have charter schools that have come up. You have some families that have chosen to go to virtual schools. So those type of programs have kind of leveled off enrollment in our school districts in this state and across the nation. So that's a broad picture of what's happening there. There are individual school counts and a link that you can click as well, but that just gives you an overview of the numbers in Lexington 1 from 2011 to present. So this is a little bit clearer of just a description of what I just described, but it gives you kind of a look of the annual growth. So when you think about in the beginning of that chart in 2011 all the way to 2019, we had about a 2 to 3% annual growth each year. And so that was roughly 500, 600 students per year. So that increase, and those of you who lived in Lexington 1, you felt like we were building a school almost every, or two schools, sometimes every single year through bond referendum, because that was needed to keep up with the growth that was happening in Lexington 1. To go from 22,000 to 26,500 in that time period, a large number of schools were needed, especially at the elementary school level, to keep up with that growth. And so then, during that pandemic year, there was a 1% decline in enrollment at that time, 26.3. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that resurgence occurred in enrollment to 27.3. And then right now, our present enrollment on the 45th day is at 26,324 students in the district. And so this is just more of a graph or a picture just to get you to kind of understand what's happening in the district. And so a 3.5% growth in that time period, and then we have a slight decline in 3.7%. But if you look around the county, you see a number of things happening of housing developments and growth that's occurring. So we anticipate that number going up. Right now, I'm just giving you a picture of what's in Power School as far as enrollment and average daily membership. Other factors that will come into place that you'll see in other meetings when we start talking about a demographic study and start to understand what's happening in their community and how that impacts Lexington 1 growth and the need for those resources when it comes to building schools. And also staffing. HR talked about staffing in the coming weeks. The next three slides just gives you kind of a picture of elementary, middle, and high, and we'll take a kind of a snapshot of elementary school. This information on the 45th day and helps us do a projection. And so what I've highlighted here, because this is the information that we have on hand now to compare, we look at the 45th day ADM, average daily membership, in 2021, 22, and 23. And so you can look at the school's average daily membership in those years. And so in that green column, for last school year, we did a 0% growth projection. So all we did is say, let's look at Power School. Let's look at the students who are rolling up to the next grade level, and then let's account just for those students, not any growth coming in or leaving. We're looking at a 0% growth, and then that information was used to help HR do the staffing in our schools. And so a 0% growth with that information. So fast forward to this school year, on the 45th day right now, you see the elementary numbers in comparison to the projection in that first green column. And middle school would look the same way when I click the slide. And so the difference in that last green column shows you difference in projection and actual ADM on the 45th day. And so you see some schools have a lower number, like Carolina Springs Elementary, just 7 students off the projection. But then the Centerville Elementary School had 48 more students. So when Devonna sees those numbers and she starts looking at staffing, that has real impact because then you have a large class size at Centerville. So how do you handle that if you need to move or shift an FTE or add an FTE to that school? And so you'll see those things happening. New Providence was one of the schools that increased to 35, but then Lexington Elementary School decreased from projection by 39. So those are sometimes real implications in staffing for a school when you look at that information. And then we look at middle school. Middle school gives you kind of the same information from elementary. The green column, again, gives you projection for this school year, actual ADM, and then you see those numbers as far as the differences. I did mention before, the yellow column, those are the numbers we're using right now to project for next school year. So for elementary school, and you'll see a total in a second, the yellow column for elementary, those are what we are pulling from Power School on the 90th day enrollment. And so we're looking at the enrollment, not the ADM, but the enrollment on the 90th day to project for next school year. We will continue to analyze that number in the weeks to come as we look at demographic information, things that are happening. So that number still may adjust, but right now we pulled it from Power School and let Power School tell us which students are rolling up to the next grade level. And so for middle school, same information. See that Beechwood is projecting next year 1059 based what's in Power School. It's a little bit easier to do at the upper grade levels. Kindergarten sometimes tough because we never know which students are coming new to us, but we have accurate numbers when we know students are rolling up in those other grade levels. And you see that middle school spread there from Beechwood into Pillion. And also that last green column there shows you the difference in projections from what we had this school year. So Lakeside grew by 37 students from projection. Actually decreased, increase, 890, sorry. And then Pleasant Hill increased by 29 students. Then White Knoll decreased by 23 students from the projection. But then you see in the yellow column there, White Knoll will get some more students back because the growth that is happening in that area next year. So you can start to see that comparison. And then for our high school, again, the 21 to 23 45-day ADM, what we projected this year, actual ADM on the 45th day, and then that last green column gives you the difference in enrollment for the high schools. And so for the...
Quick.
Yes.
What happened to Lexington High School in 21? Only 1,000 students?
It may be a typo. So we'll check that. Good catch on the eye there, so we'll double check that. It is likely a typo. We'll do the math just to make sure that we're off there. So, but good catch. And then we look at projection for next year for the high schools in the last column. And so the ADM for Lexington 1 on the 45th day right now, 26,366. And so what we are the projection for next school year for the district total is 26,155 students. So that number is less than the 45-day ADM, but again, we need to continue to do analysis of our demographic information and demographic study and see how that factors into our numbers. But once we are set on our numbers, then that will then shift to HR to then do the staffing for the schools as far as FTEs for the schools, as well as funding with Jennifer. So as I said before, accurate attendance is extremely important for our student data specialists. Coming to school, bringing your note to school to say that you had a medical appointment or something of that nature also helps, because if you are marked absent and you had a legitimate reason of being out of school, that's not going to count against you. And so sending in that note, sending in something helps us have that ADM that then drives the funding for the school district. This last area kind of was asked to let's look at our preschool enrollment. That does not factor into the funding for the district. Is that correct, Jennifer? Yeah, she's nodding her head. That does not factor in, but we do have pre-K programs in place for pre-K 3 and 4. And so we use classrooms that are available in our schools based on enrollment. Some schools are overcrowded, so they may not have the class space. But that number and the number of students that we serve in preschool has increased over the last few years. And so that is a type of service that we provide and the impact on facilities at our schools too. And so we do have to account for that in our numbers when it comes to staffing and any kind of funding that supports schools. So I wanted to give you that picture of the preschool numbers. Right now, what's in Power School is 802 students in our preschool programs across our elementary schools. And some schools have smaller numbers because they don't have enough space. So a New Providence, you see, may have one class in place, and we do have it broken down by PK3 and PK4 on another spreadsheet. But right now, you can kind of see the difference in some of the schools that may have more space or not as much space when it comes to staffing those preschool programs. So that information is just shared now. So as you collect the knowledge from the school finance class you had earlier with enrollment in Lexington 1, that will then drive decisions when it comes to the FTEs for the district, funding, budget decisions, impact, and all those kind of things that we are discussing when it comes to building that kind of budget for Lexington 1. I'll pause there, last slide presentation there for any questions you may have.
I have a question on this slide, actually. I think looking at it, I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong. Lake Murray Elementary dropped pretty significantly between 22 and 23. Do we know why?
I can't answer that question directly, but I can assume, but I'll let Mary answer that. Thanks.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Sure.
As you were going through the first slide and we were looking at the little graph chart,
This one, this one?
this same information.
Sure.
But what do we know? I know you talked sort of about at a broad level,
Yeah.
it being like charter or stuff like that. Do we have data or research that shows us why this sort of
Yes.
stagnant, if you will?
We studied information that year in particular because when you start the school year, going into that school year, we knew about schools that were coming up, and one school in particular in Lexington County was the ALA, or American Leadership Academy. And so we necessarily couldn't plan for that because the previous year we can only go on projection and number of students who are enrolled in our district, and that number rolls up. And so we start the school with staffing for that projection. But of course, that school opens in August. And so when that school opens, then you may see an exodus of students leaving and coming in as well. And so more students left during that time period. And so we did collect information on exit information for as leaving the district, for as exit codes, and we could account for students who went out of state, went to another school district in the state, or also went to ALA. And so during that time period, the bulk of students who left Lexington 1 did go to ALA. Now, we did see throughout the course of the year, students return to the district because a child or family may want to come back for various reasons, but that accounted for most of the dip that occurred during that time period.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Okay, so we are moving along. I do know that we allocated 2 hours for this meeting, and so we've got 2 minutes left of that. Dr. Price, it does look like what you've got for us is valuable because it'll help us identify areas to be presented to us as a board in the future.
And my piece is not 15 minutes long, so mine can be really short.
Okay, well then, with that, board, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Price to lead this activity.
And I promise it will be very brief because you can work on this whenever I'm done speaking and turn it in before you leave. That's what I'm going to ask you to do. So in the leadership team, we've been spending a lot of time talking about some of the same things you as a board have been talking about with regards to student outcomes. With the book study that we've been doing that's been focusing on that quite a bit. We as a leadership team have been doing that as well. And a few weeks ago, let's move it. How about that? So a few weeks ago, members of the leadership team got together and we started compiling every possible data set that we use to inform decisions. And it came from every department. So we took this master list of all of these things and we compiled them into a broader list that you see before you in this sheet called the Lexington 1 Data Landscape Areas. And they're separated by department. And so we wanted to share this with you because these are data points that we're going to be reviewing as a leadership team. But we also recognize that as you dive deeper into student outcomes, you may want to have information that's presented to you as a board as well, to be able to give you opportunities to ask deeper questions, learn more about, and so on. So we've compiled this list with all of these different categories. And what I'm going to ask you to do individually is to go through these. If you have any questions about anything that you see that may not make sense to you or may be unclear, let us know. We can clarify that. But I'm going to ask that you circle the ones that you as a board member would be interested in seeing and discussing more. And then after you've circled the ones that you have a particular interest in, I want you to put a star by the 3 that are your top 3. We will take this information back as a leadership team and create a landscape of how we will bring this data to you throughout the year to allow you to keep up to speed with the things that we're working on as a group. Does that make sense?
Okay, so clarifying, circle our interests and star our top 3.
Correct.
And
You got
turn
it.
this into.
Before you leave.
Before we leave.
Hey, you're talking about for the whole list, not each department.
Right. Go through all of the ones front and back. You circle the ones that you have a particular interest in, and then you get 3 votes for your top 3 and put a star by those. We will compile everyone's individual data and bring it back to you with a plan for how we'll roll this out over the course of a year.
Okay.
And that will be your landscape.
May I request a small extension? I'm going to have to jump in just a minute, just with the time frame, but I'll get this to you tomorrow.
No problem. Madam Chair, I'm done.
Thank you, Dr. Price. So on our agenda, item 5.1 is our book study. However, is anyone interested in possibly a motion to postpone this to a later time?
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we postpone this to a later time.
Thank
I'll
you, Ms.
second.
Marshall. Thank you, Mr. Pizzuti. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So,
I swear, Chris.
I did,
Chris draws the bye.
it's nothing personal, Mr. Rice. All right, so the next time our board will meet is February 25th for our regular monthly meeting. Board members will be attending the South Carolina School Boards Association Annual Convention, February 20th through 23rd, and we will report on the conference during our next board meeting. Do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? All right, meeting adjourned.